Namaste. Chapter 14. And it came to be in Iconium that they went together into the assembly of the Yahudim, and spoke in such a way that a great number of both Yahudim and Greeks believed. But the Yahudim who would not obey stirred up the Goyim and wickedly influenced their hearts against the brothers. So they remained a long time, speaking boldly in Adoni, who was bearing witness to the word of his favor, giving signs and wonders to be done by their hands. And the populace of the city was divided, and some sided with the Yahudim, and some with the emissaries. But when a move took place by both the Goyim and Yahudim with their rulers to mistreat and stone them, they became aware of it and fled to Lystra and Derbe, cities of Lycaonia, and the territories round about. And they were bringing the Besorah there. And in Lystra there was sitting a certain man, disabled in his feet, a cripple from his mother's womb, who had never walked. This one heard Paul speaking, who, looking intently at him and seeing that he had believed to be healed, said with a loud voice, "Stand upright on your feet." And he sprang up and began to walk. And when the folk saw what Paul had done, they lifted up their voices, saying in Lycaonian, "The mighty ones have become like men and come down to us." And they called Barnabas Zeus, and Paul Hermes, since he was the chief speaker. And the priest of Zeus, being in front of their city, brought oxen and reeds to the gates, and wished to offer with the multitudes. And when the emissaries Barnabas and Paul heard this, they tore their garments, and ran in among the crowd, crying out and saying, "Men, why are you doing this? We are also men with the same makeup as you, bringing to you the Besorah, to turn from these worthless things to the living Elohim, who made the heaven and the earth and the sea, and all that is in them, who in past generations allowed all the Goyim to walk in their own ways, though indeed he did not leave himself without witness, doing good, giving us rain from heaven and fruit-bearing seasons, filling our hearts with food and gladness." Even with these words, they still have difficulty in stopping the crowds from offering to them. But Yahudim arrived from Antioch and Iconium, and having won over the masses, they stoned Paul, dragged him out of the city, thinking he was dead. But while the Talmidim gathered around him, he rose up and went into the city. And on the next Yom, he went away with Barnabas to Derbe. And having brought the Besorah to that city, and having made many pupils, they returned to Lystra and Iconium and Antioch, strengthening the hearts of the Talmidim, encouraging them to continue in the belief, and that through many pressures we have to enter the reign of Yahuwah. And having appointed elders in every assembly, having prayed with fasting, they committed them to Adoni, in whom they had believed. And having passed through Pisidia, they came to Pamphylia. And having spoken the word in Perge, they went down to Attalia, and from there they sailed to Antioch, where they had been committed to the favor of Elohim for the work which they had completed. And having arrived, and having gathered together the assembly, they related all that Elohim had done with them, and that he had opened the door of belief to the Goyim. And they remained there a long time with the Talmidim. Chapter 15. And certain men came down from Yehuda and were teaching the brothers, "Unless you are circumcised according to the practice of Musha, you are unable to be delivered." So when Paul and Barnabas had no small dissension and dispute with them, they arranged for Paul and Barnabas and certain others of them to go up to Jerusalem, to the emissaries and elders, about this question. So, being sent on their way by the assembly, they passed through Phoenicia and Shamarun, relating the conversion of the Goyim. And they were causing great joy to all the brothers. And having arrived in Jerusalem, they were received by the assembly and the emissaries and the elders. And they reported all that Elohim had done with them. And some of the believers who belonged to the sect of the Pharisees rose up, saying, "It is necessary to circumcise them and to command them to keep the Torah of Musha." And the emissaries and others came together to look into this matter. And when there had been much dispute, Kepha rose up and said to them, "Men, brothers, you know that a good while ago Elohim chose among us, that by my mouth the Goyim should hear the word of the Besorah and believe. And Elohim, who knows the heart, bore witness to them by giving them the Ruach HaKodesh, as also to us, and made no distinction between us and them, cleansing their hearts by belief. Now then, why do you test Elohim by putting a yoke on the neck of the taught ones which neither our fathers nor we were able to bear? But through the favor of Adonai, Yah-ooh-sha Mashiach, we trust to be delivered, in the same way as they. And all the assembly was silent, and were listening to Barnabas and Paul, declaring how many miracles and wonders Elohim did among the Goyim through them. And after they were silent, Jacob answered, saying, Men, brothers, listen to me. Shimon has declared how Elohim first visited the Goyim to take out of them a people for his name, and the words of the prophets agree with this, as it has been written, After this I shall return and rebuild the booth of Daud, which has fallen down, and I shall rebuild its ruins, and I shall set it up, so that the remnant of mankind shall seek Yahuwah, even all the Goyim on whom my name has been called, says Yahuwah, who is doing all this, who has made this known from of old. Therefore I judge that we should not trouble those from among the Goyim who are turning to Elohim, but that we write to them to abstain from the defilements of idols, and from whoring, and from what is strangled, and from blood. For from ancient generations Musha has in every city those proclaiming him, being read in the assemblies every Shabbat. Then it seemed good to the emissaries and elders with all the assembly to send chosen men from among them to Antioch with Paul and Barnabas, Yehuda being called Barsabba, and Sila, leading men among the brothers, having written by their hand this, the emissaries and the elders and the brothers, to the brothers who are of the Goyim in Antioch and Syria and Cilicia, greetings. Since we have heard that some who went out from us have troubled you with words, unsettling your lives, to whom we gave no command, it seemed good to us, having become of one mind, to send chosen men to you with our beloved Barnabas and Paul, men who have given up their lives for the name of our Adonai Yah-ooh-sha Mashiach. We have therefore sent Yehuda and Sila, who are also confirming this by word of mouth, for it seemed good to the Ruach HaKodesh, and to us to lay upon you no greater burden than these necessities, that you abstain from what is offered to idols and blood, and what is strangled and whoring. If you keep yourselves from these, you shall do well. Be strong. They therefore being sent off went to Antioch, and having gathered the group together, they delivered the letter, and having read it, they rejoiced over its encouragement. And Yehuda and Sila, being themselves also prophets, encouraged the brothers with many words and strengthened them. And having spent some time, they were sent back in peace from the brothers to the emissaries. But it seemed good to Sila to remain. And Paul and Barnabas continued in Antioch, teaching and bringing, with many others also, the Besorah, the word of Yahuwah. And after some yeomen, Paul said to Barnabas, Let us now go back and visit our brothers in every city, where we proclaim the word of Yahuwah, and see how they are. And Barnabas proposed to take with them Yauchanan, called Mark. But Paul thought it not fit to take with them the one who withdrew from them in Pamphylia, and had not gone with them to the work. A sharp feeling therefore came to be, so that they parted from one another. And so Barnabas took Mark and sailed to Cyprus, and Paul chose Sila and went off, being committed by the brothers to the favor of Elohim. And he went through Syria and Cilicia, strengthening the assemblies. Chapter 16. And he came to Derbe and Lystra, and see a certain Tammy was there named Timothy, the son of a certain Yahudi Asha who believed, but his father was Greek, who was well spoken of by the brothers who were at Lystra and Iconium. Paul wished to have this one go with him, and he took him and circumcised him because of the Yahudim who were in those places, for they all knew that his father was Greek. And as they went through the cities, they delivered to them the regulations to keep, which were decided by the emissaries and elders at Jerusalem. Then indeed the assemblies were strengthened in the belief, and increased in number every yom. And having passed through Phrygia and Galatian country, they were forbidden by the Ruach HaKodesh to speak the word in Asia. When they came to Mysia, they tried to go into Bithynia, but the Ruach did not allow them. And having passed by Mysia, they came down to Troas. And in Delilah a vision appeared to Paul. A man of Macedonia was standing, begging him and saying, Come over to Macedonia and help us. And when he saw the vision, immediately we sought to go to Macedonia, concluding that Adonai had called us to bring the Besorah to them. Therefore, sailing from Troas, we ran a straight course to Samothrace, and the next yom came to Neapolis, and from there to Philippi, which is the principal city of that part of Macedonia, a colony. And we were staying in that city for some yomim. And the Shabbat yom, we went outside the city by a river where there used to be a prayer. And having sat down, we were speaking to the women who met there. And a certain Asha named Lydia, a seller of purple from the city of Thyatira, worshipping Elohim, was hearing, whose heart Adoni did open to pay attention to what Paul said. And when she was immersed and her household, she begged us, saying, "If you have judged me to be believing in Adoni, come to my house and stay." And she urged us. And it came to be, as we went to prayer, that a certain slave girl, possessed with the ruach of Buton, did meet us, who brought her Adonim much profit by foretelling. Having followed Paul and us, she cried out, saying, "These men are the servants of the highest one Elohim, who proclaim to us the way of deliverance." And she was doing this for many yomim. But Paul, greatly annoyed, turned and said to the ruach, "I command you in the name of Yah-ooh-sha Mashiach to come out of her." And he came out that same hour. But when her Adonim saw that their anticipation of money-making was gone, they seized Paul and Sila and dragged them into the marketplace to the rulers. And having brought them to the captains, they said, "These men, being Yahudim, greatly disturb our city, and they proclaim practices which are not right for us to receive nor to do, being Romans." And the crowd rose up together against them. And the captains tore off their garments and commanded them to be beaten with rods. And having laid many blows upon them, they threw them into prison, commanding the jailer to keep them safely, who, having received such a command, put them into the inner prison and fastened their feet in the stocks. And at midnight Paul and Sila were praying and singing songs to Elohim, and the prisoners were listening to them. And suddenly a great earthquake took place, so that the foundations of the prison were shaken, and immediately all the doors were opened, and all the chains came loose. And the jailer, awaking from sleep and seeing the prison doors open, thinking the prisoners had fled, drew his sword and was about to kill himself. But Paul called with a loud voice, saying, "Do no harm to yourself, for we are all here." And asking for a light, he ran in, and fell down trembling before Paul and Sila. And having let them outside, he said, "Adonim, what do I have to do to be delivered?" And they said, "Believe on Adoni Yah-ooh-sha Mashiach, and you shall be delivered, you and your household." And they spoke the word of Yahuwah to him and to all who were in his house. And taking them in that hour of the Lilah, he washed their wounds. And immediately he was immersed, he and all that were his. And having brought them into his house, he set food before them. And he rejoiced with all his household, having believed in Elohim. And when Yom came, the authorities sent the officers, saying, "Let these men go." And the jailers reported these words to Paul, saying, "The captains have sent to let you go. Now then, come out and go in peace." But Paul said to them, "They have beaten us publicly, uncondemned, being Romans. They have thrown us into prison, and now do they throw us out secretly? No, indeed, let them come themselves and bring us out." And the officers reported these words to the authorities, and they were afraid when they heard that they were Romans. And having come, they pleaded with them and brought them out, and asked them to leave the city. So coming out of the prison, they went to Lydia, and seeing the brothers, they encouraged them and went forth. Chapter 17. And having passed through Amphipolis and Apollonia, they came to Thessalonica, where there was an assembly of the Yahudim. And according to his practice, Paul went in to them, and for 3 Shabbatut was reasoning with them from the scriptures, explaining and pointing out that the Mashiach had to suffer and rise again from the dead, saying, "This is the Mashiach Yah-ooh-sha, whom I proclaim to you." And some of them did believe, and a large number of the worshipping Greeks, and not a few of the leading women joined Paul and Sila. But the Yahudim who did not believe, having become envious, took some of the Belial men from the marketplace, and gathering a mob, set all the city in an uproar, and came upon the house of Yah-ooh-sha, and were seeking to bring them out to the people. But not finding them, they dragged Yah-ooh-sha and some of the brothers to the city rulers, crying out, "They who have turned the world upside down have come here too, whom Yah-ooh-sha has received." And all of them are acting contrary to the teachings of Caesar, saying there is another King Yah-usha. And they troubled the people and the city rulers when they heard this. And when they had received the pledge from Yah-ooh-sha and the rest, they let them go. And the brothers immediately sent Paul and Sila away by Lila to Beroia, who, having come, went into the assembly of the Yahudim. Now these were more noble than those in Thessalonike, who received the word with great eagerness and searched the scriptures daily, if these words were so. Then many of them truly believed, and also not a few of the Greeks, decent women as well as men. And when the Yahudim from Thessalonike came to know that the word of Elohim was proclaimed by Paul at Beroia, they came there also and stirred up the people. And then immediately the brothers sent Paul away to go to the sea, but both Sila and Timothy stayed there. And those who arranged for Paul brought him to Athens. And receiving a command for Sila and Timothy to join him as soon as possible, they departed. But while Paul was waiting for them at Athens, his heart was stirred up within him when he saw that the city was wantonly idolatrous. Therefore, indeed, he was reasoning in the assembly with the Yahudim and with the general worshippers, and in the marketplace daily with those who met there. And some of the Epicurean and Stoic philosophers encountered him, and some were saying, "What does this babbler wish to say?" Others said, "He seems to be a proclaimer of strange mighty ones," because to them he brought the Besorah, Yah-ooh-sha, and the resurrection. So they laid hold of him and brought him to the Areopagus, saying, "Are we able to know what this fresh teaching is of which you speak? For you are bringing some strange things to our ears. We wish then to know what these mean." For all the Athenians and the strangers living there spent their leisure time in doing nothing but to speak or to hear what is current. And having stood in the midst of the Areopagus, Paul said, "Men of Athens, I see that you are very pious in every way. For passing through and observing the objects of your worship, I even found an altar with this inscription, 'To the unknown mighty one.' Not knowing then whom you worship, I make him known to you, Yahuwah, who made the world and all that is in it, this one being Adonai of heaven and Aretz, does not dwell in dwellings made with hands, nor is he served with men's hands, as if needing any, himself giving to all life and breath and all else. And he has made from one blood every nation of men to dwell on all the face of the earth, having established beforehand the times and the boundaries of their dwelling, to seek Adonai, if at least they will reach out for him and find him, though he is not far from each one of us. For in him we live and move and are, as also some of your own poets have said, for we are also his offspring. Now then, since we are the offspring of Elohim, we should not think that the Elohim is like gold or silver or stone, an image made by the skill and thought of man. Truly then, having overlooked these times of ignorance, Elohim now commands all men everywhere to repent, because he has set a yom on which he is going to judge the world in obedience by a man whom he has appointed, having given proof of this to all by raising him from the dead. And hearing of the resurrection of the dead, some indeed mocked, while others said, "We shall hear you again concerning this." And so Paul went out from among them. But some men joined them and believed, among them Dionysius and the Areopagite, and an Asha named Damaris, and others with them. Chapter 18. And after this Paul left Athens and went to Corinth. And he found a certain Yahudi named Aquila, born in Pontus, who has recently come from Italy with his Asha Priscilla, because Claudius had commanded all the Yahudim to leave Rome, and he came to them. And because he was of the same trade, he stayed with them and was working, for they were tent makers by trade. And he was reasoning in the assembly every Shabbat, and won over both Yahudim and Greeks. And when Sila and Timothy came down from Macedonia, Paul was pressed by the Ruach, and earnestly witnessed to the Yahudim that Yah-ooh-sha is the Mashiach. However, when they resisted and blasphemed, He shook his garments and said to them, "Your blood is upon your head. I am clean. From now on I shall go to the Goyim." And having left there, he came to the house of a certain man named Yah-ooh-sha, who worshipped Elohim, whose house was next to the assembly. And Crispus, the ruler of the assembly, did believe in Adoni with all his household. And many of the Corinthians, hearing, believed and were immersed. And Adoni spoke to Paul in Delilah by a vision, "Do not be afraid, but speak, and do not be silent, because I am with you, and no one shall attack you to do you evil, because I have many people in this city." And he remained a year and 6 months, teaching the word of Yahuwah among them. And when Gallio was proconsul of Achaia, the Yahudim with one mind rose up against Paul and brought him to the judgment seat, saying, "This one does seduce men to worship Elohim contrary to the Torah." And as Paul was about to open his mouth, Gallio said to the Yahudim, "If it were a matter of lawless doing or wicked recklessness, Yahudim, there would be reason why I should bear with you. But if it is a question of words and names and a law which is among you, see to it yourselves, for I do not wish to be a judge of these things." And he drove them away from the judgment seat. And all the Greeks took Sosthenes, the ruler of the assembly, and beat him before the judgment seat. But Gallio showed no concern whatever. And Paul, having stayed several yeomen more, having taken leave of the brothers, was sailing for Syria, and Priscilla and Aquila were with him, having shaved his hair at Cenchrea, where he had taken a vow. And he came to Ephesus, and left them there, but he himself went into the assembly, and reasoned with the Yahudim. And when they asked him to stay a longer time with them, he declined, but took leave of them, saying, "I have to keep this coming cat festival in Jerusalem by all means, but I shall come back to you, Elohim desiring so." And he sailed from Ephesus, and having come to Caesarea, going up and greeting the assembly, he went down to Antioch. And having spent some time there, he went forth, passing through the country of Galatia, and on through Phrygia, strengthening all the Talmudim. And a certain Yahudi named Apollos, born in Alexandria, a learned man and mighty in the scriptures, came to Ephesus. This one had been instructed in the way of Adoni. And being fervent in heart, he was speaking and teaching the things about Adoni exactly, though he knew only the immersion of Yahukanon. And he began to speak boldly in the assembly. And when Aquila and Priscilla heard him, they took him aside and explained to him the way of Elohim more exactly. And when he intended to pass through Achaia, the brothers, having encouraged him, wrote to the Talmudim to receive him, who, having arrived, greatly helped those who believed through favor, for with power he refuted the Yahudim publicly, showing from the scriptures that Yah-ooh-sha is the Mashiach. And it came to be, while Apollos was at Corinth, that Paul, having passed through the upper parts, came to Ephesus. And having found some Talmudim, he said to them, "Did you receive the Ruach HaKodesh when you believed?" And they said to him, "No, we have not even heard that there is a Ruach HaKodesh." And he said to them, "Into what then were you immersed?" And they said, "Into Yahukanon's immersion." And Paul said, "Yahukanon, indeed immersed with an immersion of repentance, saying to the people that they should believe in the one who is coming after him, that is, in Mashiach Yah-ooh-sha." And when they heard this, they were immersed in the name of Adoni Yah-ooh-sha. And when Paul had laid hands on them, the Ruach HaKodesh came upon them, and they were speaking in tongues and prophesying. And all the men were about 12. And having gone into the assembly, he spoke boldly for 3 months, reasoning and persuading concerning the way of Elohim. But when some were hardened and did not believe, speaking evil of the way before the people, he withdrew from them and separated the Talmudim, reasoning daily in the shul of Tyrannus. And this took place for 2 years, so that all who dwelt in Asia heard the word of Adoni Yah-ooh-sha, both Yahudim and Greeks. And Elohim worked unusual miracles through the hands of Paul, so that even handkerchiefs or aprons were brought from his body to the sick, and the diseases left them, and the wicked ruachs went out from them. But certain roving Yahudi exorcists took it upon themselves to call the name of Adoni Yah-ooh-sha over those who had wicked ruachs, saying, "We exorcise you by Yah-ooh-sha, whom Paul proclaims." And there were 7 sons of a certain Skua, a Yahudi chief priest, who were doing this. And the wicked rock answering said, Yah-ooh-sha I know, and Paul I know, but who are you? And the man in whom the wicked rock was leapt on them, overpowered them, and prevailed against them, so that they fled out of that house naked and wounded. And this became known to all, both Yahudim and Greeks dwelling in Ephesus. And fear fell on them all, and the name of Adoni Yah-ooh-sha was made great. And many who had believed came admitting and declaring their actions. And many of those who had practiced magic brought their books together, burning them before all. And they reckoned up the value of them, and found it to be 50,000 pieces of silver. So the word of Adoni was growing mightily and prevailing. Now when these things had been completed, Paul purposed in the rock, when he had passed through Macedonia and Achaia, to go to Jerusalem, saying, After I have been there, I have to see Rome too. And having sent into Macedonia 2 of those assisting him, Timothy and Erastus, he himself remained in Asia for some time. And about that time there came to be a great commotion about the way, for a certain man named Demetrius, a silversmith, who made silver shrines of Artemis, provided no little business to the craftsmen, who, having called them together with the workers of similar trade, said, Men, you know that our wealth is from this business. And you see and hear that not only at Ephesus, but throughout almost all Asia, this Paul has persuaded and turned away a large number, saying that there are not mighty ones which are made with hands. And not only is this trade of ours in danger of coming to rejection, but also that the temple of the great female mighty one, Artemis, whom all Asia and the world worship, shall be regarded as worthless and her greatness tarnished. And having heard this, they were filled with rage and cried out, saying, Great is Artemis of the Ephesians. And the entire city was filled with confusion. And they rushed with one mind into the theater, having seized Gaius and Aristarchus, Macedonians, Paul's fellow travelers. And Paul, intending to go in among the mob, the Talmudim did not allow him. And some of the officials of Asia, being his friends, sent to him, begging him not to risk himself into the theater. Then others indeed shouted this and others that, for the assembly was confused, and most of them did not know why they had come together. And some of the throng instructed Alexander, the Yahudim, putting him forward. And Alexander motioned with his hand, and wished to make his defense to the people. But having recognized that he was a Yahudi, all with one voice cried out for about 2 hours, Great is Artemis of the Ephesians. And the city clerk, having claimed the throng, said, Men of Ephesus, what man is there who does not know that the city of the Ephesians is the guardian of the temple of the great female mighty one, Artemis, and of that which fell down from Zeus? Therefore, if these things are undeniable, you need to be calm and do not act rashly. For you have brought these men here who are neither temple robbers, nor speaking evil of your female mighty one. If truly then Demetrius and his fellow craftsmen have a case against anyone, the courts are open and there are proconsuls. Let them accuse one another. And if you have any further complaint, it shall be settled in the regular assembly. For we are in danger of being accused of rioting concerning today, there being no reason which we could give to account for this disorderly gathering. And having said this, he dismissed the assembly. Thank you very much. That's it. I'm gonna change. It was 14 to 19. Sorry about that, I forgot to change it. Going through a lot here. So yeah, today was 14 to 19, not 8 to 19. In King Yah-usha's name, God bless you all. Amen. Namaste. Namaste.